Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the FESPA Digital Hub. My name is Laurel Brunner, and this is my colleague Paul Sherfield.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to our session. We're going to be talking about workflow and color management this afternoon for the next hour. And I'd like to just ask of the audience, how many of you are already printing digitally? Most of you, good. So you know what words like RIP and color management mean. Good, you're in the right place. Right, our first slide. We're basically trying to get you thinking in terms of what your strategy should be for the future. Because any digital application is all about the data and what you do with it and how you manage it. So, as I said, I'm Laurel Brunner. I'm the Managing Director of Digital Dots, which is a small publishing company and consulting company. We produce a journal every month. What else do? We write a blog, we do consulting, we do freelance writing, and the ISO TC 130 stuff is a black hole of voluntary work that we do. It takes us to all sorts of interesting places, but we are very much involved in standards for the graphic arts industry. And I tweet and stuff. Paul Sherfield.
Thank you. I run a consultancy in the UK which looks at workflow but with a special emphasis on colour management. So we look at the way images are prepared, the way the files are prepared, how they're produced as PDFs, how proofs are done, and then how they're printed. And how they're printed can be on a huge web offset press or a wide format inkjet device. Like Laurel, I look after a number of standards committees in the UK, specifically the UK working group, steering group for the certification of ISO 12647, and we've now led that into wide and narrow format digital printing, which is ahead of the standards group at the moment, but it's keeping us busy keeping up with people. And I also represent the UK on TC 130 certification working group. So between the day job and that job, it's quite a busy lifestyle.
Over to me.
Over to you.
So we're doing this together because it'll be more interesting for you. I hope. Just a few thoughts. The Prepress supply chain, obviously. You have files coming into your workflow, into your shop. They're going to be PDFs. They're going to be native files. You might get even more horrible things coming in, but you get files coming in. Then you have to check it, what's in the file. Basically, you're checking it to see whether the content of that file can be printed, that it doesn't include transparency, for example, that your RIP can't handle. This is the biggest question because this is where the errors begin, and the cost of error rises the closer you get to the press or printing device. You also need to check what the color content expectations are with your customers. Traditionally, we've always done this with hard copy proofs, but with a digital workflow that all changes. We use soft copy proofing, for example, or we use digital proofing devices. You care about color accuracy and you care about the appearance. And this is where color management and data management, this light in my come into the model. Okay, the reason that digital workflows are so important, obviously, that's how you get data to your printing device. You don't have films, you don't have plates anymore, you go direct to the printing engine. So you have to manage the process as well as you possibly can. The main reason for it, though, is it saves you money. Every time you remake a job because the color is wrong, it's costing you money. A lot of money sometimes, depending on the size of the job. As I said earlier, the cost of every error you make, or every error your customers make in their files, rises the closer you get to the press. So, time as well. Have you ever thought about this ratio, what the job profit ratio is? You calculate it based on the profit that you get relative to how much it's cost you to produce that job. But within that cost, you very often have intangibles. So your customer service people having to explain to somebody that the PDF they've submitted isn't quite right and why and what they have to do. All of these things eat away at your margin. Supply chain management in wide format. Well, this is all the basics of any kind of workflow. You need to worry about how files are delivered, how you communicate with your customers. So for example, do they understand that you want a certain type of PDFX file? And do they understand how to make those PDFX files? How do you communicate to non-technical people the technical part of what you want? And then also, how do you make sure that your installation procedures work really well? There's a lot of money to be made in doing that well and in removing signage as well. Over to Paul.
Just carrying on from Laurel, I think one thing to be aware of and think about within the wide format world is that a wide format RIP is not a workflow, it's just part of the workflow. I mean, the whole pre-flighting area isn't carried out too well by wide format RIPs. A lot of wide format RIPs do now have decent colour management. But colour management in the workflow just touches lots of areas. As Laurel said, file preparation. If you're spending lots of time on file preparation, correcting clients' files, talk to your client about getting the files right in the first place, because they are the start of this process. And we'll talk a bit more about that later. What are the images? What colour space are they in? Raster, vector, RGB, CMYK. Do they have a profile? Don't they have a profile? Laurel touched on PDFX. Another show of hands. Who's familiar with PDFX? That's good. If you're not, find out about it. X stands for exchange, and it is a standard. And it's a standard which says this is the way to submit files for printing. And there's PDFX 1A, there's PDFX 4, which the two you might be interested in. But this is not really the forum to go into great detail on that. I mean, how are you proofing? Contract proofing, both soft and hard copy. Are you producing proofs on your production equipment? Does it come off other equipment? What standards, what validation? How are you proving to yourself that your proofs are correct and repeatable? If you're soft proofing, what are you telling your client? Is it contract proof? Should they be looking at it on colour managed screens? Do they know what colour managed screens are? Have they got the screens that actually can be colour managed, or is it just for content? Managing what I like to term the approval process in terms of passing and approving proofs is it's vital that your client understands what they're approving for. Is it colour? Is it content? Is it corrections? Is it a piece of retouching you've done? They need to know, and there's lots of confusion in this area, and one misstep again will cost you or your client a lot of money. And the other way, the final place it touches is printing and presses. And as you can see, I'll put presses in inverted commas because that can be anything from a small digital press to a huge litho press to a wide format press. But the basic concept is the same. It's making sure that that colour's managed accurately from the image to the output and is controlled all the way through. Because one of the things to bear in mind with colour management is if it drops out of a colour management chain of custody, your colour will go wrong and you won't meet client expectations. But get this right and you have a very measurable return on investment. Production will be quicker, communications will be more accurate, and your waste will drop. This is me for a bit now. I mean, the wide format people, do you use device stroke substrate profiles? For every substrate you use on every printer, does it have its own individual profile? Somebody's nodding at the end there. Well, if you do, you're probably ahead of the game. Because let's talk about the ICC. Does everybody know what the ICC is? No, somebody. It stands for the International Colour Consortium. A bit of background. It was started in 1994 and by about 7 companies. I won't bother to list, but Apple were amongst them. I think Kodak were amongst them. Adobe. And they decided that Agfa, yeah. They decided they didn't want to go down the same route as Betamax and VHS videos. They recognised that all the big companies were working on managing digital colour, because even then they'd recognised that all colour was going to go digital. So they sat their colour scientists around the table for about 18 months, looked at the competing technologies, and then chose Apple's colour sync technology at the basis of it. And that's what the ICC and our International Colour Consortium is. It is the de facto standard for colour management in the graphic arts industry. And anything you touch, whether it be a PC, a Linux box or a Mac, at the heart of it will have what is Apple's colour sync technology managing colour. In your RIPs, it's managing it there. And it's just a way of changing colour to different devices from different colour spaces to another colour space accurately using ICC profiling. That's a very quick overview of what the ICC is. So when you create a device and substrate profile, you are describing the way that device with its inks will print on that substrate. And unfortunately, if you want to print accurately, repeatably, and match other types of output, that has to be your starting point. So you need to look at the technology, the RIPs, and the colour management software that you may need to create this device and substrate profile for each device, for each substrate you're likely to use. In some areas you can group similar substrates together, but wide format printers print on a huge range of substrates. Your issues in this area are much greater than the litho industry, to speak. I mean, can they be generic? You can download ones from manufacturers. If it's from the manufacturer of your printer and it refers to a substrate by name, it will be reasonably accurate. But because you're working on your particular printer in your particular environment, it won't be as accurate as doing it yourself. You know, and I said, you need one for every single combination. But they're made on using colour management software. People like ColorLogic, X-Rite make these software and hardware to measure it. And sometimes this calibration is actually built in to your RIPs. It's worth talking to your RIP manufacturer about it. And then, what is a simulation profile? Strange name, it's sometimes called other things. You've got your device profile, and that will actually run your device to the widest gamut it can on the substrate you're using. But you might be doing a beautiful poster, you might be doing a series of exhibition panels, but they might need to match some leaflets and some brochures that your client's doing. So it might require you to match a litho profile. So with most of your RIPs, you can put in, say, a Fogra 39 base profile, which describes an offset litho press on coated paper, and then you should be able to match, because your simulation profile is correct, the two will talk to each other and you should be able to match another form of printing. So you simulate a profile for an offset litho press. Again, we will cover a little bit more on that later in. And this comes as to common colour appearance. Because what clients want is their products to match each other. So the top, I won't read it, the top description there is the technical description of common colour appearance as the ICC will put it out. But in graphic arts, it's increasingly used by clients to cover production from many different processes. So they want their posters, their stand-ups, their bus sides, their leaflets, their brochures, their direct mail, especially with brand colours, to look the same. And only by using colour management and ICC profiling can you make it work. You've got Pantone Live looking at brand colours. You've got GMG and their systems looking at brand colours. But we're talking about images in this case. If Universal Pictures releases a new version of Spider-Man, they want their images of Spider-Man across the front of a cinema to look exactly the same. They want it on the programmes, if the tickets are printed, they want it on that. And this is a pressure that's coming on you as printers from your clients. And if you're not ready for it, you could catch a cold. This is you.
Yeah, so what does that mean for your business? It's obvious that colours that are printed on different devices have got to look the same. But if we're operating in a digital world now where the on-demand model is becoming increasingly, prevalent. People want prints that they can originate themselves and print on devices that somebody else owns, but they want the colours to look the same. Brand owners want that too. They want the flexibility of any kind of media anywhere, and that includes printing. So yes, you have to have common colour appearance. The only way you're going to be able to achieve it, as Paul says, is using the science, is printing by numbers, using the specifications that the ICC have developed and actually managing the data, because, as I said in the beginning, that's what this is all about. It's controlling and managing data. So if you can control your colour data, you can deliver to your customers a guarantee that says, yes, my signs that I produce for you will look the same as the brochures that you're printing. They'll look the same as the brochures you're printing on a digital device, short run, variable data even, and they will look the same on a long run offset device. And this, from a business point of view, is a very compelling argument because it adds value to the services that you're offering. It also saves you waste, it saves you remakes, it saves you having to argue with your customers about colour, because you have a digitized workflow that controls all of these parts, all of these factors. Over to Paul.
Just before I carry on with this slide, I mean, if most of you are wide format printers, I'm guessing, when you put your hands up, I mean, if you are producing a series of panels for an exhibition and the client makes a change to one panel, are you confident then you just repeat that panel, it will match the other 6 or 7? I know a lot of printers that would actually go back and print the whole 6, 7, 8 panels again, because after a week they wouldn't be confident of matching identically what they'd done the week before, because their controls are not in place. I mean, that's just waste, because you can only charge for the panel you've changed. It does demonstrate the need for colour management quite well. As we were saying earlier, the drive of the need comes from clients, brands, corporates, retail and agencies, certainly in the UK. They're looking at their images, they're looking at their web pages, and I was talking about this a few minutes ago, consistently driving colour accuracy. In the UK, there are some print management companies now which are looking at live reporting from presses on their runs. So they are actually putting in cloud-based servers where every time on a press a colour bar is read on the run, that report goes live through to the headquarters of the print management company. And they've got systems where if it goes out of an agreed tolerance, it pings up and they're on the phone to ask the printer what's happened with that run, what's happened with that production, has it been stopped, has it been altered? It is a bit Big Brother-ish, but it is happening. And again, especially within the promotion, as Laurel was talking about, you may not be printing all of that promotion, but what you print will be expected to match what printers B, C and D have done. And again, people will start talking to you about can you match a Fogra 39 based colour space? Can you prove you're matching it? Can you print? Are you certified to ISO 12647 in some way? How are your proofs validated? Please talk to me about how your colour management workflow works. This will be the larger companies at the moment, but it will trickle down through your client base. And that's even before we talk about cross-media, which I wasn't going to go into too much. But when things start going onto tablets, onto phones, onto the web, or even into e-books, all sorts of issues come up there. All I'd say is when in doubt, use a profile called sRGB, but don't embed it, and things will look quite reasonable.
Okay, so, excuse me, why should this matter? We've spoken a lot about making sure that colours look the same wherever they're presented, but just keep in mind that the quality of your production, the quality of the colours that you can deliver, is all about money. You don't want to be selling rubbish prints to customers because they're disappointed. You want to spend your sales efforts before you start producing work with the customers beforehand, knowing that you can deliver the results that they expect. Every time that you're having to resell work after the fact because of mistakes, or they're disappointed, or they didn't understand how a particular Pantone colour would look on a certain substrate, you're wasting time. And it means that your machinery is also not being fully utilised because it's down, waiting for you to sort out some other problem in case you've got to rerun it. Transmedia campaigns, excuse me, we've moved on from cross-media. A transmedia campaign is one where you use all the media to reinforce what they do. So, for example, a poster at a railway station that has a QR code for somebody to order milk and bread from a supermarket. They can take a picture of it with their phone, the message goes to the supermarket, and by the time they get off the train, their groceries are being delivered to where they live. That's the type of thing that I'm talking about with transmedia, where you use different media to reinforce processes and to encourage people to respond. My most favorite example of it is, do you know the musician Jay-Z? Has anyone heard of this person? Huge, yes, right. Well, you know the biography that was published, I think a couple of years ago now, sold 1 million copies on the very first day, because the way they marketed it was to come up with an online game, a whole load of posters all over the world, that linked clues to the online game and the posters. And essentially these things told the story of this character, how they grew up, where they worked, the first gigs they played, so that the market was primed in the most wonderful way, using transmedia models to buy the book as soon as it came out. 1 million copies of a book on the first day. Astonishing. But that's what colour management is also to do with. Because in that workflow, they made sure that any types of logos or colours that were used always looked the same in every single environment. So it should matter to you because it's exciting and interesting, and you can offer alternative services to your customers, but colour management's also about margins. Every time that you're fiddling to try and get the colour looking better, either on screen or on your printing device or on your proofer, you are wasting time. And this eats away at the margins for each job. Any time that you're having to spend fiddling or redoing or correcting is money, and that's why it should matter. And business efficiency. You have to have people who know what they're doing. You have to have customers who understand your workflow. You have to have a supply chain that is as profitable as possible. There's a printing company in the UK he's not a wide format printer, he's in the commercial sector, but he set up a web-to-print system that processes 30,000 jobs a day. His average job value is about €3, and he's making 15 to 20% profit on every job. That sounds complete nonsense. But the reason for it is that the workflow is completely automated. As soon as work comes in on the website, it's in the workflow and it's on press within minutes. This is why colour management matters, is because it's about your business and how much money you make out of it.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. Just carrying on briefly from what Laurel was talking about. I often quote a chap called Dave Brailsford. You may be aware that the British cycling team is very, very successful. And he has this attitude of incremental improvements. He doesn't go after improving something 10% here, 20% there. He looks to put a new oil on a bicycle chain, which will give him a 1% improvement. Change of diet to a cyclist will give him 2% improvement. He says they're much easier to do, but after a sort of 3 or 4 months of that, they've got up to 10, 15% improvements. That's why they won a bucket full of gold medals at the London Olympics. I think this is the way to look at efficiencies within printing companies. There's another sheet-fed printing company in the UK that looks at reducing its make-readies by 10 seconds a month, and it goes after another 10 seconds. And they're now down on perfecting Heidelberg presses to sort of 3 minutes, 40-second make-readies. This is litho again, but they've used exactly this approach. You know, in every area they look for incremental improvements. And as Laurel said, colour management can be used as that. You know, you have the measuring tools. Often when I talk to printers, you know, they say, oh, this is all printing by numbers. So I say, well, no, it's not. It's printing 2 numbers, but at last we know what the numbers ought to be. You know, 20 years ago it was a craft, you know, and maybe some people called it an art. These days it's a technology, but we still need the skills of printers in certain areas, you know, even on a litho press if it's just feeding paper. I mean, understanding the RIPs people run, what can be done on them in your case, and the different substrates is important for wide gamut, for wide format printing. But if you're coming back to this slide, because Laurel got me thinking about other things as you were talking then. You know, we do have different device gamuts, and Laurel's got some examples of that, I believe, on the next slide. You know, across the printing processes and within individual printing processes. It's especially true of wide format. Different manufacturers with their different ink sets, different ink types, you know, water-based, eco solvents, UV, sublimation, and the number of inks they're running will have vastly different ink gamuts. And combine that with what we were talking about earlier. I mean, you can print almost on anything, including glass, wood, metallics. But to do it accurately in each case does require this high degree of knowledge and application of colour management. And as I said, every one of these substrates, every one of these printers needs its own ICC profile as a starting point. And this is before any thought is given to colour, common colour appearance, as we mentioned it before. So it's getting these technical challenges in your mind and then making sure your staff have the competence and the training to deal with them.
Thank you. I think that training is probably the most important thing to consider. Think about what you invest in your people as you're listening to what we have to say. Workflow automation, as I mentioned earlier, the job comes in, it passes through the workflow in an automated way. No delays, no one touching it, no one stopping it, straight out to press. How you do that depends obviously on your particular setup, but make sure you get the most out of your RIP. If you've got multiple wide format machines, have you also got multiple RIPs driving them? If you do, you might want to consider going to a single RIP architecture so that one RIP controls everything that gets printed in your shop. Set the RIP up so that it's clever enough to know where it can send different types of jobs. Make sure that you use a common processing model so that all of the devices that you have can be driven by that one RIP. Make sure that the RIP is doing everything that you want it to do. Make sure you understand the compatibility of your RIP with the types of PDFs that you're asking people to send in. There's no point asking people for to accepting PDFX4 files if your RIP can't process them. So put some time and effort into figuring out exactly how your RIP's working and what it's doing. It's not just a print driver. It can do many, many more things. You've also got less space and less stuff to manage if you've got a common RIP architecture. And space is a premium in any business. It's also a premium to not have to worry about lots of different servers and computers if you can just do it all in one system. Find out why your pre-flight checking is turning up lots of rejected files. It might just be you've got one customer that doesn't know how to submit files. It might be that the way you've set up your pre-flight checking procedures isn't necessarily as robust as it should be. These are things that will help automate the flow and improve within that how your colour data is managed. If they are your customer's problem, you have an opportunity to teach your customers how to deliver decent files. And this is worth the effort. People get anxious and paranoid, oh, well, I'm going to lose that customer and they're going to be taught how to do this and I will lose them. That's a very short-term view. Explaining to customers how to deliver files is part of your relationship with them. It's part of building loyalty. It's also part of educating yourself, because the more problems that you find out about within your customer's workflow, the better you can anticipate your investment needs and what you need to be doing in-house. It's also the basis for additional revenues. There are so many printers who say, oh, well, I had to spend 3 hours fixing this and it was unbillable. Well, why? If the file is bad, tell them it's bad, tell them how to fix it, or tell them it's going to cost them more because it's taken your operators 3 hours to fix. People should be willing to pay for this. If they're not going to take responsibility for their own errors, they should pay for somebody else to fix them. And understand data formats. We mentioned earlier the ICC. The ICC has very, very clear specifications for how you submit files for a colour-managed workflow. Their website is very simple, www.colour.org. You can go there and understand much more about data specifications and formats and all that good stuff. I mentioned PDFX4. That is one of the most recent in the X series. It's the one that will accept transparency as well as optional content. You can't use it in a variable data workflow, but it can accept optional additions or omissions in a file. And it's by far the most, I think, the most important PDFX format for colour-managed workflows. CXF you may not have heard of. Has anyone heard of CXF? You have. Okay, one, but CXF, it stands for Color Exchange Format, and it's in process. I think it was X-Rite who gave it over to the ISO committee, and we're in process of making this into a standard. And it's essentially just it is a standard format for communicating color data and the associated metadata that goes with it. So these are things that are all very easy starting points for you to do when you go back to your factories.
Thank you, Laurel. Just one more thing. I will mention what Laurel said. If you are thinking of using PDF X4, you've got to check that your RIP is Adobe PDF print engine version 3 or similar from other RIP manufacturers, because if your RIP can't handle transparency, it won't handle PDF X4 files very well. But you've got to keep up with your RIP technology, because your clients will be using software that can produce files you may not be able to process, especially if they're using the later versions of CS and CC now from Adobe. So, offset digital v digital color gamuts. They are not the same. Obviously, on offset litho, the gamut will depend upon the type of paper it's on. An uncoated paper will have a smaller range of colours it can print, a smaller colour gamut, than if it's on a coated paper, hence the different profiles that printers use. Many digital machines will have larger differing colour gamuts than offset litho, but we're probably saying that offset litho is often the one you need to match, because there are no standards for digital printing yet. Do you want to say a quick word about the digital printing standard? What's happening on that?
Excuse me, coming up with a standard for digital printing is very difficult, because we have so many different ways of using digital technology to print, whether it's toner-based, whether it's inkjet-based. In all of those, in both of those categories, you have all sorts of different approaches, and most manufacturers have been quite content to just manage their particular model of device. So coming up with a standard has been hard. The approach that we're trying to take, though, is to develop a standard that is process agnostic, meaning that it is a data-driven standard. The number is 15339. We are now in final draft international standard for it, and 15339 is all about data. So you configure your data for a particular printing condition. So it's a very logical way to do it, but it does assume quite a lot of understanding of digital workflows and how to manage digital processes so that you get the output that you want. So it's coming. Not yet.
Yeah. Thanks, Laurel. The other paragraph from the bottom just shows you the number of profiles, both RGB, CMYK, which are out there. You know, you have European Rotary Review Association pack space, which is a packaging standard for gravure and off for gravure. You've got GMG with Color Master, you've got Adobe RGB, ECI RGB, Fogra 39, you've got ISO 12647, all of these things sort of competing for your client's attention on what they should be doing. So I asked the question, is there a need for a master colour space? And a lot of people have said yes. And indeed, with some of the new work on standards, they are looking at like a wide gamut CMYK colour space, which encompasses every CMYK printing device you're likely to use. But from a client point of view, go on, this was your slide, Laurel, so you just go into this first, and I'll go back into mine.
I should just say as well, on 12647-2, ISO published an update to that late last year, which means that a lot of the profiles that Paul mentioned might not necessarily work. Fogra 39 is being updated to be Fogra 51.
I have referred to it later.
Yeah. Okay. So, but the point about this is that the technology moves on, and you have to constantly be kind of staying ahead of the game to anticipate what's going to come down the line, and to anticipate what your customers are doing, which is why this whole idea of customer communications is so important. We've mentioned color gamuts. Color gamut is obviously the number of colors that can be printed in a particular space or on a particular device. So I thought it would be useful for you to see that these numbers are based on tests that we've done. We do a lot of digital wide format and digital narrow format testing. Offset color gamut is 400,000 colors, and that's distinguished by a delta E of 1, which is below that you can't see, or I can't see it, but delta E of 1 difference, you can see the color. So that's the basis for distinguishing the 400,000. RGB, Adobe RGB is 1.2 million. sRGB is 750. And these are the results from 3 machines that we tested in the last year or so. And you can see that they vary considerably. The lowest is the HP FB 7500 with only 376,000 colors. And the highest looks like it's the Mimaki, the JFX. So these are just numbers based on the tests that we did. So they are not absolute, because depending on what ink you use, what you're printing on, for coated versus uncoated stocks, you will get different color gamuts. I mentioned 12647-2 because there's a company in Switzerland called Christinger that had to match the color that they were doing for sign work with the color that was coming off of their offset presses. And they decided that to demonstrate this, they would go to ISO 12647-2. So they found that it was a very useful tool for them to get to understand more about how they could implement color management.
Back to me. So what has happened is, because there isn't a defined digital standard yet, clients are tending to set their own. And they're saying Fogra 39, which is going to be replaced by Fogra 51 eventually, as I've mentioned at the bottom. It's sometimes called ISO coated version 2, and there's a number of different profiles. And it is an offset standard, but it will increasingly probably turn into what your clients want you to reproduce on wide format. And that's the reason why you might be using a smaller colour gamut than your machine is capable of. As you can see from Laurel's previous slide, many wide format machines can have a wider colour gamut, and you can run them natively at that gamut if you've created this device substrate profile. I mean, should you use the full gamut? Well, the answer is possibly. If you are just doing a one-off promotion, which has got to look beautiful, and you want the very best relationship between the Adobe RGB images coming in and your CMYK colour reproduction going up on a wall, you're approaching the fine art area here. If you want that absolutely wonderful reproduction, then yes, use the profile, use the widest gamut you can get out of that particular piece of equipment. And as we've alluded to, other things coming along. Fogra 51, it will replace Fogra 39, and 52 will replace the uncoated profile in the offset litho world. Same size gamut, but different requirements for printing from it, which is not correct to go into here. But I don't think they will be genuinely released until the second half of this year. So people are still, and the changeover time will probably take 2 or 3 years, because there's an awful lot of legacy work going on. In the UK, we're going to do some tests again with Fogra 39 with Fogra 39 profiles, Fogra 51 profiles, and some of the new American profiles on the new G7 way of printing, based on what's called their CRPC6 reference print conditions. Characterised, yes, I cut it out, which are very similar to Fogra 39, so we're just going to mix and match them and see how they print. I mean, I know it's a litho way of looking at things, but it will have some relevance to the way the wide format industry is going. Right, it's me again. So, drivers are from clients and printers markets. For some markets, it may be better using the full gamut. Brands are demanding that match across all media, as we've spoken about at length. And do not underestimate the communication and educational needs you must address in this area. And it will save money for you if you get it right. Something we've been coming back to all of the time. Get it right, you will save waste, you will save production time, you will save communication issues. And again, this is you. Yes, that's you.
You can do it.
No, go on, you do it.
You have to start from the point of view of looking at your whole workflow and deciding where you can automate. Because every time you automate, it'll force you to understand what's happening to the data. Because if you're new to this type of idea, this type of thinking, if you're a printer who thinks ink on substrate, you'll have a very different mindset than if you're an entrepreneur who's seen an opportunity in the wide format digital market and has a degree in IT and has decided to set up a business managing data. You'll have a very different perspective. Looking at the digital workflow that you want to have will teach you how you can improve the way you manage your color. Okay? Education. I've been in this industry now for nearly 35 years, and I've been writing about digital prepress and digital production for most of that time. And it's amazing to me how far we have not come. We should be far further ahead. Some people are. Some companies are doing really, really well. They're making a fortune, and they are producing incredible work without any major pain. And a lot of people are not. This is why so many printing companies have gone to the wall. It's not just because of the internet. It's because they failed to invest in the knowledge they need to develop their businesses. So don't underestimate that, and be prepared to spend money teaching people. Hire people to come in and educate your staff about what they're doing, or hire people who've already got the education. But this is important. You can't wing it anymore in a digital workflow. You have to understand how it works and what it can do for you. You know it makes sense. Of course it makes sense. Education always makes sense, doesn't it? Just nobody likes to go back to school. Well, it's about adding value to your business. And that's really the perspective you should have. This is about getting the most out of the capital equipment that you've bought. You're spending millions of euros on machines and not able to get the most out of them because people don't necessarily understand what they can do. You don't understand well enough what they can do in order to communicate it to your customers and prospective customers. All of this is about managing your human resources so that you can get more out of the capital investments that you're making. So you need to be prepared to resource them in some way. Even if it's not bespoke training, encourage them to read the trade press, encourage them to learn from your peers, to come to shows like this. What you're doing is a huge step, because all the people who don't come to a show like this to learn are automatically putting themselves at a disadvantage.
This brings us really to the nub. Have a documented colour management policy. What do we mean by that? Well, understand at the desktop level, within Quark, within Adobe CS, what your colour settings are. I mean, the default colour settings are undoubtedly wrong, totally wrong. Understand when you press that button, when you open an image which says ignore profile, understand why you shouldn't do that. Understand what you're converting to and from, and document it. Document it with screen grabs. Write your own colour management policy. And that goes into your workflows. Define what your workflows are. Do you need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different colour managed workflows? You may do if you're using different output devices, different substrates. Define them, link them back onto the desktop, link them back to your client. Know exactly what you're doing with your automated workflow. If it's going to that roll and press, printing on that vinyl, you know exactly what your workflow is going to do with it. It's going to use that profile, and if you want to match something else, a simulation profile for Fogra 39, because it's got to match something else for your printers, know what's happening, define it. And this will control the colour in your workflow by just making sure you're using the maximum abilities of your staff and you're using the maximum abilities of your software and hardware. And get it written down. Get it done as a manual. Now, parts of that manual can then be used by clients in file preparation. If you map out, with screen grabs again, how to produce beautiful PDFs, PDFX1A or PDFX4, out of InDesign, for instance, which produces beautiful PDFs, and you give your client your colour settings files, as they're called, out of Adobe, and you can produce your own ones with your name on, copy them with your profiles if you need to, give them to your client with some training, tell them how to produce good PDFs. Your client will be empowered. An exercise I did with a small printer, which was wide format digital, narrow format digital, and offset, real short-run colour specialist, we'd identified that he had £60,000 worth, pound sterling, of what he called unrecoverable hours in his prepress area, putting right clients' files. So he looked at this in two ways. We could have put a huge colour server in, which would have automated all the colour in the workflow. But he decided that's not what he wanted to do. So what we did, we identified the clients which had the most problems and also had the highest turnover, and we started training courses for them. And for the smaller companies, we had them in 2 or 3 at a time into the printing company. The larger companies, we went to their premises and trained them on colour management. Put this company's colour settings files on their Macs and their PCs, told them how to produce good PDFs. And that figure is now down into just £4,000 or £5,000 a year. And that's taken a year to do. And also it's locked in an amount of their clients because they suddenly realise they are working in ABC printers colour settings, ABC printers PDF X4 settings, and sometimes they get jobs they don't expect because their clients now understand that this printer really can deal with digital files properly. It understands digital photography. They've got colour managed screens in, they can retouch correctly as well because they do a degree of fine artwork. So the return, that's a huge return on investment. You just think of your own net profit, and this printer was turning over about 4 million a year in pound sterling. To put £60,000 on the bottom line, which he very nearly did, would have probably cost him he'd have had to put on probably £250,000 worth of stuff, £250,000 worth of, or no, £750,000 worth of turnover. This is without the waste, without the speed of throughput that he gained from this. Very good for client retention. I actually call it a wide area workflow. It's extending your colour managed workflow, your technical workflow, your pre-flight workflow back into your clients and including them as part of that workflow. And that's probably the biggest thing you can take away from this 45 minutes we've been talking.
Yeah, it's about the data supply chain. Understand it, and you add value to your business just because you understand it. But where do you start? One of the things that we do at Digital Dots do as a company, we do a lot of auditing, and it's amazing how few companies actually think through the process of what an audit is going to be for their colour management, for their workflow. Start out by mapping what you've already got. Go from department to department and actually understand what happens in that department. Who does what? How often do they do it? How error-prone is that process? How long does it take? What value does it add to a particular job? What does it cost you? All of these types of questions. Start with your existing workflow. I put up a few examples: order taking and processing, file intake. How many people touch the file? That's the crucial question. You want to know, are 4 or 5 people having to do different things to that file because nobody knows everything they need to do, or because the file is so broken it needs a lot of fixing. Whatever it happens to be, do a process map. In looking at the types of mistakes that you come across in each department of the business, quantify them in some way. If there are common errors in sales, you know that you need to tell your salespeople how to communicate the services that you offer, because something's going wrong, you're getting errors. In customer services, when they give people deadlines that maybe are unrealistic, find out why and educate them as to what their deadlines should be so that the customers have the right information. And in prepress, obviously, that can be any number of things, from introduced errors to people not understanding how to do RGB to CMYK conversions. Maybe they've set screening values that don't make any sense for a device and somebody else is having to fix that mistake. All kinds of different little mistakes. They can be identified and quantified. And if you think this is all about control. You cannot control something if you can't measure it in the first place. So about measuring and controlling is what this process is all about. And for each of those processes and each of those departments, do its SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Go through each of those things, SWOT, throughout the company to identify where you need to invest effort and money in training or whatever. Maybe you need to buy new equipment. Maybe you see an opportunity because you've got some absolutely brilliant prepress operator that you're underusing. Maybe you've understood more about the devices that you're using and you can expand the range of work you're doing. So through the audit, you can find all kinds of other opportunities as well as dangers. Then, obviously, once you've done that audit, you define what you want to change, what your profitability expectation should be. Maybe you want to add, what did you say, 56,000 to the bottom line. And in the case that Paul is citing, they needed to generate £750,000 more business. If your profitability expectation is only 2 or 3%, what do you have to do to achieve that? And to what extent can you achieve it with what you've got? Yes? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And then be prepared to take time over this. Don't expect to send a memo to somebody or an email to somebody and ask them to fix it. They won't. You need to budget time and you need to prioritize it.
That's it.
And now questions. That was the last slide. So now strengths, SWOT. Any other questions besides that one?